All right, it is a Locked On Heat NBA trade deadline special. We are live with 30 minutes to go until the deadline. Will Kyle Lowry get moved? Will the Heat finally find their power forward? All of that and much more coming up next.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to the Locked On Heat NBA trade deadline special. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil, going live on YouTube for an hour, talking about everything going on at the NBA trade deadline. And of course, as always, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. A ton to get to here. We've got the latest intel on Kyle Lowry, potential landing spots for him, buyout candidates for the Heat, and breaking news as it comes in over these next 30 minutes and then some after the deadline. We'll be here with you from 2:30 to 3:30. But David, let's start with the big trade of the deadline. That's Kevin Durant going to the Phoenix Suns for 4 unprotected first-round picks, a first-round swap, Jade Crowder, Cameron Johnson, and Mikal Bridges. Obviously huge for the Suns, who crack open their championship window wide open, but also finally brings the conclusion of the Durant and the Kyrie Irving Nets. Your thought on what this means for the Brooklyn Nets, the Eastern Conference as a whole, and of course the Miami Heat.
Well, I think it's a fantastic move for Phoenix. Obviously, they're getting a one of the best players in the game. Changes the course of their team completely. They had struggled a little bit this season. They weren't quite on the same path that they wanted to be in terms of their contention for a title, and then they acquired Durant. As far as the Nets' perspective on it, well, it's a good move. They get to reset. They get some nice players back. It's a fair haul. I don't think it's one that Miami could have matched, and I know a lot of Heat fans are upset that they weren't able to pull off a miracle trade for Kevin Durant, but it seems like Durant, one, wanted to go to Phoenix, that this is a carryover from his request for a trade over the offseason, and then two, Miami's offer just couldn't match that. And so I don't think there's anything to necessarily be upset or despondent about. I'm sure Miami did their due diligence. And I think that's something to consider throughout the rest of the trade deadline, whether a move happens or not. It's something to always keep in mind, is that Miami is definitely trying to make moves. That doesn't necessarily mean that a move is going to get done. Everybody sees the flurry of activity and wonders, oh, Sleepy Pat. I'm seeing it now, even as we're talking about this, several comments referring to Sleepy Pat. And it's not like they're not trying to make a move. I'm sure they were as active as possible in trying to acquire Kevin Durant. But in terms of finalizing any deal and being able to match Phoenix's offer, not quite a possibility at this point. As far as the Eastern Conference,
let's stay there though, because being active and actually having what it takes to match that offer, they just don't. Two different things. I know for a fact, and everybody does, that Pat Riley was very invested in Kevin Durant. The fact of the matter is, the reason that the Heat did not make a move of any real like any meaningful moves over the last 8 months is because they've been waiting for the Kevin Durant shoe to drop. Look, it was always a long shot that they were going to get Kevin Durant. But as soon as KD listed Phoenix and Miami on his list of preferred destinations in July, the Heat felt that they had to do everything they could to make sure that they maintained at least a chance. Maybe it was a 10% chance. Maybe it was a 5% chance. Maybe it was a 2% chance. But if there was a chance to land a talent like Kevin Durant, the Heat at least felt like they had to at least keep that opportunity alive. And so that's why you see them maintain their cap flexibility, not get hard capped by offering PJ Tucker that full mid-level exception. That's why they didn't use any first-round picks to supplement the core of Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and all these other things. I also think that the fact that they re-signed Tyler Hero to the extension and people said it's impossible for him to get traded was way overstated. I'm pretty sure that the Heat felt if that they had to trade Tyler Hero in order to land a Kevin Durant type of superstar, that they could have done it, that they could have facilitated it with a team like the San Antonio Spurs or when they had cap space, the Indiana Pacers, in order to facilitate that extra salary that would be moving around. So that's why we're here. Ultimately, Kevin Durant ended up in Phoenix because it's just a strange kind of series of events, right? ESPN releases that report on Robert Sarver with the work placement conduct. He gets kicked out. They bring in Matt Ishbia, who is this billionaire guy who buys the team. He actually gets control of the team before the trade deadline, which initially people didn't think was going to happen. So that he gets control of the team before the deadline, and like any new owner wants to come in and make a splash. And according to the reporting around it, they were bargaining about maybe protections on these picks. Do we include Mikal Bridges or not? And Ishbia called James Jones and says, I don't care. Give them what they want. Get the deal done. Bring Durant to Phoenix. And so you have all these series of events that happen with the old owner getting kicked out, the new owner coming in and wanting to make that splash, and all these things. And then obviously Kyrie Irving not getting the extension he wanted from Brooklyn, and then demanding a trade because he felt like that he wasn't being taken care of there. So he goes to Dallas, and then Kevin Durant's looking around and it's like, well, what am I going to do here? It feels like it's the end of whatever it was that we had going on here. And so then he demands a trade. And then now it's an open market. I am sure that Miami Heat put in a call to the Brooklyn Nets, and the Brooklyn Nets were like, well, what do you got? And they were like, we could figure out something with Tyler Hero. Are you interested in him? And our 2 first-round picks that we have available. Also, we could probably unlock protections on that third one, and maybe we could put some pick swaps in there. That comes nothing close, right? You could throw Nikola Jovic in there. Who cares? He's an unproven rookie. Like, that is not at all what Phoenix was able to put on the table. And no matter what the Heat wanted to do, they would have never been able to offer that. You can't put Bam in there because he's foundational to any sort of championship build. While you have Phoenix sitting there, they kept their 3 best players and then added Kevin Durant to it. That's how many assets that they had in addition to the first-round picks that they were able to put on the table for the KD trade. So all of this comes down to the fact that, yeah, the Heat were active. They wanted to get Kevin Durant, but they couldn't get Kevin Durant. It always was a long shot. It didn't work out. But now that Kevin Durant is gone, it provided some clarity to what it is that they could do. Unfortunately, that clarity hasn't really amounted to anything, as we're 23 minutes away from the deadline. That's the end of my long spiel. Thanks for listening.
No, we should add, look, just because we haven't heard of any reporting or the deadline might pass, doesn't mean a deal may not get done. The Heat notoriously tight-lipped. If there's a team that doesn't have any kind of leaks internally or doesn't have any direct connection to Adrian Wojnarowski or Shams Charania, it's probably Miami, the most tightly close to the vest organization in the NBA, with the exception maybe of the Oklahoma City Thunder. But in any case, the point being that they're going to have to see this deal as it's getting called into the NBA front offices. Deals can be sent in prior to 3 p.m. They may not get approved or finalized until after that 3 p.m. deadline. So still a possibility for some activity, even in the few minutes, maybe half an hour up to after the deadline takes place. So don't despair just yet. Stay with us throughout the entirety of our broadcast.
Absolutely. Look, stuff is happening. These trades kind of feel like they come in like 2 or 3 or 4 at a time, and it's pretty wild here. Again, I don't think that the Heat have been very aggressive on Kyle Lowry. We know that. I want to talk about that in a minute. And then there's going to be the buyout thing afterwards too. And there might be some smaller deals. You mentioned the fact that the Heat don't really leak things. Last year, they announced the KZ Okpala trade via press release. That hasn't been done since like 2009 before that. Like, that doesn't happen anymore. So I think the Heat are working on things. This is not necessarily an issue of Pat Riley being asleep. This is just the fact that this is a team and on a front office that had previously basically just the entire strategy was, let's hope and pray somebody like Kevin Durant puts Miami on his list of preferred destinations and then hope he forces his way to us. I have maintained this all year long. That's not a strategy. Hoping for something that happened is not a strategy. And I said this and I wrote this before the season started, that the Heat were basically veering towards mediocrity. And I got a lot of flack for that. People said I was being too harsh. I was being melodramatic. And you look at where the Heat are, and they're just mediocre right now, unfortunately. And they're mediocre in terms of roster. They're mediocre in terms of record. And they're less than mediocre in terms of assets that they have to go out. They don't have any meaningful cap space. And so they've kind of went into this trade deadline thinking, okay, can we get Kevin Durant? That was one path. Obviously, that path is no longer viable. And then if it's not the Kevin Durant thing, do we try to move off of what limited assets we have to get off of salary and increase some of our flexibility in terms of cap and roster? Or do we try to move some of these picks and just upgrade this current core and just say, you know what, maybe the star's never going to come. Let's just bring in an actual power forward, for instance, and allow Caleb Martin to move back to the wing, his natural position, and then just start building around this group and just see where it goes and just sort of gun for number 4 in the East, because that at least is what feels possible. I know that people are saying that the East is wide open now because KD left and Kyrie left Brooklyn. I don't think that's true. I think Boston's a really good team. I think Milwaukee's a really good team. I think Philadelphia's a really good team. I don't view the East as wide open. I view it as a 3-team race now. Do you disagree, though?
No, I don't necessarily disagree. I think the potential of Miami is still there. Like, every team is trying to make these acquisitions for an all-star, right? To shore up a roster or whatever. The reality is Miami has 2 realistic all-star level players, top 20 players already on their roster, Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler. They don't have a top 5 guy. And so it's not quite the same move as Giannis Antetokounmpo or the Milwaukee Bucks trying to acquire, say, Jay Crowder, things along that side. But I think it's similar to that. That's the whole reality, is that you have 2 players, and everybody's talking about Jimmy Butler, whether they should trade him, whether they shouldn't trade him, that he deserves better, this and that. Jimmy has been mostly on autopilot for most of the regular season, and I think there's still the potential of a much more dangerous version of Jimmy Butler in the postseason, which takes his team to a whole other level. I look at the Eastern Conference, and you're absolutely right, that the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Sixers, they're all dangerous. They're all a tough challenge. That does not mean that Miami is incapable of beating all of those teams. I absolutely believe that they have a puncher's
in a series.
Team. Yeah, absolutely. In the Eastern Conference, I am not concerned about the Celtics, the Sixers, or the Bucks in a series.
You're not concerned?
No. Why would I be? Miami has shown the ability to beat all those teams. They've beaten all those teams. Quite literally, they
lost to the Celtics, and they lost to the Celtics last year. They didn't have to play the Bucks.
Okay, they played basically an iteration of this Celtics team a couple of years ago in the bubble. Whatever.
Wait, so you're telling me that you would be confident in a 7-game series in the playoffs, those teams having home court advantage, because they will. You're confident that the Heat would come out of that series?
Not confident.
But you're saying you're not concerned.
I'm not concerned. Well, first of all, it's not my job to be concerned. I think Miami has a chance against any of those teams. And I think us, 5 Reasons, anybody else along the sides of the media has played up this idea of, like, Miami's roster is defunct and they should be blown up. Look, I'm not necessarily a fan of the team. At the same time, I do view this roster. You've got 2 really good players in Bam and Jimmy. You've got a pretty solid player in Tyler Hero who's capable of scoring, and this is his postseason to prove it. If he doesn't come through,
is Miami's top 2 better than Boston's top 2? Yeah. Why not? I mean, Tatum is very, very good. Jaylen Brown is still not a perfect player by any stretch. I think Bam has risen in his ceiling considerably to the point where I think he is as good a player. You could put them at the same par. I don't know. I think all right. Let's run with that, though. If the Heat truly believe that, if the Heat think that, because you're right, it doesn't really, like you said, it's not your job to be concerned or not. It doesn't really matter what we think. Ultimately, it's what the Miami Heat think that's going to determine what they do at this deadline, or what they do in the offseason after this deadline, or on the buyout market after this deadline. I have said this all along. I don't think that the Heat are confident in this team. If the Heat thought that this team was a championship contender, they wouldn't be doing everything they can to try to get a superstar upgrade. If they thought they were a legit contender, they would have been doing what Philly did in the offseason, trading a first-round pick for DeAnthony Melton and adding to its team.
Can I just add something to that? In 2005, this team was a bad Dwayne Wade rib away from knocking off the Detroit Pistons.
Okay.
The team that had just won the NBA Finals.
Okay.
What did they do? Blow up the entire roster. They could believe that the team is good and still look at potential changes in order to improve this
because
roster.
They felt like they were close. They said, "Hey, we got D Wade here. Let's go ahead and give him the talent that he needs." They like I said, the Heat didn't do any of that. The Heat just kept the roster. And so I think
improvement internally, and I think it's enough to get you. I think this year's team, honestly, despite the record being different, I think this year's team is still actually better than last year's group.
If the Heat,
even though the record doesn't
believe that, then why not trade a first-round pick for a power forward?
Well, maybe none is available. We're starting to see look. We've seen a lot of these moves get done, and I think the market has been off ever since the Minnesota Timberwolves screwed the pooch with Rudy Gobert, and it's kind of correcting itself to some degree. But we're also I've seen a lot of comments about the cryptocurrency comparisons to second-round picks. Everybody's throwing those away like Tic Tacs and candy that nobody actually has. It's like, oh, take my second-round picks. Miami doesn't have those picks necessarily, so they can't necessarily package 85 second-round picks and Max Strus to acquire.
But they have two first-round picks that they can use in a trade, and that I think one first-round pick would be worth more than 4 or 5 second-round picks. I truly believe that, and so why not put one of those on the table? And everything that we know about the Miami Heat is that they're not doing that. And I keep coming back to this. If you're the Heat and you think you actually have a chance to win a championship this year, they're just not acting like it. They're not acting like it. And this team, I don't know what kind of season you or anybody is watching based on the first half of the season that leads you to believe, yeah, this team is complete. We got it. Let's go. Like if you have a chance, you have to try to take that chance. Now I understand them holding out for Durant because why wouldn't you? It's Kevin Durant. But now that it's been done, I that kind of goes back to what we were saying before. Whether or not they're trying to get something done or they're just simply, or maybe they feel like they don't have to get anything done. To your point, they don't really have what it takes to get anything done. We've seen this now with, not that they would have wanted to trade for Rudy Gobert, but you saw the price that he went for, the price that Donovan Mitchell went for, the price that Kevin Durant went for. Starting just to get in the door for one of these superstar caliber players, or Rudy Gobert, is 4 first-round picks, mostly unprotected or all unprotected, some swaps in the middle, and multiple good young players. The Heat don't have any of those things. They don't have the draft picks. Like I said, at most they can get to 3 first-round picks, but that would require them to lift protections on the OKC pick that they owe, and that's going to cost something, by the way, and it might be their only second-round pick that they have left. The only second-round pick that they could trade is one in 2029 after they used one to dump Dwayne Dedmon onto San Antonio. And then they have a good young player in Tyler Hero, but that's it. Like, that's the only young player with upside. I don't think that there's an organization like saying, yeah, throw Nikola Jovic in there. That'll get the deal done. I just think he's too unproven at this point. And then all the undrafted guys, like, that's not moving the needle for anybody. So when you look at a team like the Nets, who acquired all this stuff, including Jay Crowder, and then flipped Jay Crowder in that Kevin Durant deal, and then flipped Jay Crowder to the Bucks, who put 5 second-round picks on the table, David. That's
ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
Insane. And I know, and like you said, like, people are like, well, who cares? It's just second-round picks. And I keep saying, look at every trade that I've said this all the time. Look at 80% of the deals that get done at the deadline. Most of them include second-round picks. So you could poo-poo what it is the second-round pick is worth. All I keep saying is it greases the wheels at the trade deadline every single year, and it's what puts you over the top. And so I would imagine for the Bucks to offer 5 second-round picks, there were other teams offering 4 second-round picks, right? You don't just get to 5. That takes negotiation. So Crowder was a name that a lot of Heat fans thought would make sense at power forward, but ends up on an Eastern Conference rival.
He's not even going to play there. He's not even going to play there.
Like, he'll come off the bench.
He's going to come off the bench and do nothing.
If you are a championship team, this is what you do. You just say, you know what? We need the depth. 5 second-round picks out the door. Bring in a guy that can play 12 minutes in the playoffs for us.
Miami fans are complaining about Miami's current depth, and I think it's equivalent to Jay Crowder rotting in Milwaukee. Like, what is the point of the Bucks saying other than, oh, we kind of have a hole at the 4? Basically, it's insurance in case Bobby Portis or Brook Lopez breaks down in the playoffs.
Well, Bobby Portis is already hurt.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm saying break down in the playoffs.
You bring in Jay Crowder.
Yeah, you bring in Jay Crowder. Who knows if he even plays? 5 second-round picks for Jay. Like,
that's what I'm saying. That's
I get it.
The kind of move you make. If you think
is that what Miami fans want as far as the Heat to do? Like, just throw away everything in order to acquire a middling player that's not really going to contribute much?
I won't speak for Heat fans tuning in. I just know that me personally, I always said it wasn't worth a first-round pick for Jay Crowder. I don't think that he was.
Oh no, I know that's what I'm saying. Like, I think, but like instead of criticizing
Miami, closer. Because the Bucks are closer to actually being a contender, where the Heat aren't. The Heat have to actually maintain whatever assets that they have. And by the way, the Bucks had 5 second-round picks. The Heat don't. Like,
instead of criticizing Miami for not making these moves, shouldn't they be praising Miami for not making these moves, like not throwing away whatever limited assets they may or may not have for Jay Crowder? Like, is it worth it? Is that the thing that's going to necessarily change the course of this team? Is like throwing away a first-round pick on Jay Crowder? You know, we talked about this all season long. If he's bought out, and look, there are other names out there that can't get bought out. There are other improvements. Not necessarily a guarantee that they'll come to Miami, but not necessarily not a guarantee either. There's still the possibility of improving this roster through some other changes. And look, I mean, I don't know. There's a Oh,
I think that Gary
so
Payton the second to the Warriors for 5 second-round picks. Again, 5 second-round picks for a useful rotation player. Look,
just signed him to trade him back.
I don't know that it's worth the argument that we're even having. All I'm saying is that there are teams acting like they're close to a championship, and there are teams acting like they aren't close to a championship, and the Heat are the ones that are acting like they aren't close to a championship. Now, I don't think that Jay Crowder would have been worth that investment. I don't think he's the player that puts the Heat over the top. He could potentially be a player who makes a difference for Milwaukee in the playoffs. Those two teams are just differently constructed. It's the same thing that I said about Donovan Mitchell. Like, you don't trade Bam Adebayo for Donovan Mitchell because then you bring in Donovan Mitchell and then all you have is Donovan Mitchell and Jimmy Butler, and that's not good enough. It's a good team. It's exciting. It's not good enough. I don't know that there was other deals that made sense, or Bam Adebayo even for Kevin Durant. Like, you can't facilitate that kind of move and bring Kevin Durant even in and think that that team should be a favorite in the Eastern Conference. It doesn't work that way. But Cleveland, because they had all of their picks available to them in a deal, because they had so many young assets and things that they could move, they were able to bring in Donovan Mitchell and keep Evan Mobley and keep Jarrett Allen and keep Darius Garland. Like, they were able to keep their three best players and still bring in Donovan Mitchell. Phoenix just did it by keeping Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and DeAndre Ayton. And yeah, you lose good players, Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, but you lose all your draft picks, but you get Kevin Durant. The Heat just don't have a way of doing that. It's going to cost everything to get anything. And so what that anything is better be basically 2014 LeBron James or 1997 Michael Jordan. And so I just think that the Heat need to make a decision now and say, okay, what's a realistic path forward for us? Because every team needs a path forward. You could be content with the roster or you're not, but you can't just stay in stasis forever. You need to have some kind of path forward and some sort of vision in terms of roster building. And in terms of what Miami is doing, I don't really know what they're doing. It kind of just feels like there's indecision among them. And we do know that they are trying to move Kyle Lowry. We know that. They're being aggressive in trying to shop Kyle Lowry. What I've been told is that the Heat are aggressively shopping him. It's believed a fresh start could be best for both sides. The question is whether the Heat are going to have to attach a draft pick of some kind or some other asset to move off of him. I think the Clippers were obviously in the mix. I think the Bulls are another team that's worth keeping an eye on, unless something happened in the last 10 minutes that changed that. But
look like it has.
Let's talk about Kyle Lowry a little bit. So the Clippers were the team that was the team that I kept hearing the most going into this deadline, going into today. The Clippers ultimately make a different decision. They go ahead and acquire Bones Highland from Denver. They send Luke Kennard to the Grizzlies in a 3-team deal that nets them Eric Gordon from the Rockets. And then they just sent Reggie Jackson to Charlotte for Mason Plumlee. So they basically just sort of addressed their main needs. Bones Highland's not really a table setter on offense. He's more of just a bench scorer. Eric Gordon, not really that guy, but there's enough ball handling there now where they probably will just trust sort of table setting on offense by committee and instead of going after somebody like Kyle Lowry. And by the way, they could always go after Russell Westbrook in the buyout market too, and there's been ties to him as well. We'll talk about Miami's chances to get Russell Westbrook in a bit. And then you send Reggie Jackson to Charlotte and you get Mason Plumlee, and Mason Plumlee at least addresses a little bit of their backup center needs. These were all needs that Miami were potentially trying to fill. Ultimately, the Clippers go in this direction with multiple teams as opposed to just dealing with the Miami Heat. How big of a blow is this for Miami's chances of moving Kyle Lowry, do you think?
Significant. He's part of this roster moving forward, and then I think that's not necessarily the wrong move either. Like, you hope that he gets healthy enough so that he can regain some semblance of contribution in Miami. Like, you talked about the Kevin Durant move, the fact that they were able to still keep their three best players. Like, Miami, who is their third best player? Tyler Hero? Who's their fourth best player after that? And that's where it gets really muddy. And so, I mean, you have to hope, as unlikely as it might seem, and as frustrated as Heat fans are, you have to hope that Kyle Lowry can emerge to at least be that fourth best player on the Heat roster. Maybe it's Caleb, maybe it's Max, maybe it's Duncan if he has some kind of resurgence. I think it's Kyle Lowry, and then you can look in the offseason. If you're wondering aloud what the plan is for Miami, I think that's it. You revisit in the offseason. You hope that either Bradley Beal or Dame Lillard, somebody else along those lines, the same retread names that Miami's heard for years, shakes free or requests a trade. Because again, like we're a few months away from the Nets being we're a month away from the Nets being actual contenders in the Eastern Conference. We're 6 months away from Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant requesting trades. So who knows what can happen in the offseason?
But then what? But then what? But then what? Like, it's the same situation you were in with Kevin Durant. Let's say hypothetically,
Damian
Lillard.
I disagree with this view, and maybe it's just me. This is who I am personally, and I'll say maybe it extends to the front office view as well. This 5-year plan, this 10-year plan, who the hell knows? Who the hell knows? Like,
no, David,
everything in the league changes so quickly.
A 1 year, so have no plan. Have no plan.
The 1 year plan is to be a playoff team. Like, people in our comments saying trade Jimmy Butler for assets so that you can eventually get back to the playoffs. That's the goal.
If the 1 year plan is to be a playoff team, why not make a smaller move instead of just being fixated on these superstars? That's what I'm saying. And that's why I just keep saying that the front office doesn't share the same view as you do, because they're holding onto their assets in order to make these superstar trades. My problem is that even if Damian Lillard asks out in 6 months, the Heat are not going to have what it takes to get Damian Lillard, as we've just seen after all these other superstar trades. They just don't have what it takes to get these superstars. So I'm kind of in a roundabout way agreeing with what you're saying, David. Screw the superstar thing. Who cares? I don't know if that's actually what you're saying, but I'm saying screw the superstar thing and just go get a player who makes sense for this roster. It's why I keep banging the table for John Collins. I don't even know if he's available.
He's off the table according to Chris Haynes, reporting
because of all the front office changes that has gone on with the Atlanta Hawks lately. But a player like that, for instance, would make sense. And if it just costs you a first-round pick, then in 2023, now I wouldn't trade like the 2027 or 2029 or anything like that. But if you could just trade one first-round pick from this summer, then just, I don't know, get a starting caliber power forward. Move Caleb Martin back to his perimeter position. That's a better team.
Kelly
and then you can just go for something. You go for the 4
seed. Next few minutes. Kelly Olynyk coming back to Miami. That's the
maybe.
Move. Will that satisfy everybody? I don't know. Like, they ran Kelly out of town when he was just last year, and now everybody's changed course somehow because it's the desperation for moves. This is people again saying, why am I defending the front office? Because the front office is doing something. They've tried their best. They hoped that what it was on the roster. Maybe that's faulty, right? You go back to a couple of years ago. Miami awarded Dion Waiters and James Johnson contracts because they had proven themselves during that 41-41 season, and they deserved those contracts at the time. That they live up to them, you know what? That was a mistake. Now it feels, it's easy in retrospect to say Miami made a mistake in awarding those contracts, but they had earned them at the time. And Miami thought they were building something with Dion and James Johnson on the roster. Did it work out that way? No, it didn't. But, it doesn't matter because they wound up trading those players anyway and acquiring Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala, and that was enough.
And one of the things that Pat Riley always said during that stretch is, hey, these are tradable contracts. And that ended up being true. Because he traded them. And you ended up those ended up being the guys that brought back Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala, and they make the finals run to the bubble. And you have said this all along. If Dragic and Bam don't get hurt, you think they win that finals in the bubble
for sure.
And for sure. Obviously, there's it's not it's not a bad take. They don't have those contracts anymore. They don't really have those mid-sized contracts. Oladipo, I guess, is one of them. Yeah. He could veto any trade. I don't know if he really would do that at this point, but. So just go. Let's just to tie a knot on the Lowry thing. It's meaningful that he wasn't at the game last night. He was not present at the arena. He's dealing with
excused absence, right?
Excused absence. Now it's a little touchy when we talk about Kyle Lowry because of some of the off the court personal issues, and perhaps he was dealing with something in that regard, and it wasn't the left knee that was keeping him away from the facility. That said, I go back to what I said at the start. There have been people around the league that believe that a change of scenery and a fresh start would be better for both sides in terms of Kyle Lowry and the Heat. So I'll be interested to see if Kyle Lowry is not moved in the next couple of minutes, what happens with Lowry with the Miami Heat after the deadline. It's at least worth monitoring. Maybe it's something they have to revisit in the offseason, and that's it. All right, let's talk about where can we go now? Who else is even available left? Should we do the Zach LaVine thing?
Yeah,
we still have a few seconds.
Let's assume that it's not going to get done before.
Well, we heard that according to some reports that the Bulls had engaged with the Knicks on a Zach LaVine deal. Reading between the lines, that means that the Bulls are open for business on Zach LaVine.
Yeah, and
I had one, and again, the Bulls were a team that I had heard as a potential Lowry destination. They want an upgraded point guard. They sort of want an adult in the room. They could obviously they think that DeMar DeRozan is a core part of their roster. DeMar DeRozan has that relationship with Kyle Lowry. They're best friends, even more so than Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler are. And so a lot of that kind of makes sense. But to me, if this doesn't work, the reason it doesn't happen is because you don't want to. The Zach LaVine thing was a non-starter, whether the Heat didn't want to pay Zach LaVine, didn't view him as the answer that puts them over the top, or maybe they didn't have what it took to get Zach LaVine in terms of draft capital and all that kind of stuff. Maybe they couldn't get up to the money, whatever. The Bulls like Nikola Vucevic a lot. His salary sort of matches with Lowry, but from what I've been told, they're ready to like overpay for Vucevic in the offseason. They really like him. Think about that what you will, but that's their stance. And then in terms of other salary, like it's Lonzo Ball, who we don't know if he's going to play again. Like, so it never, to me, if the Bulls thing doesn't happen, it doesn't look like it's gonna. That's the reason why. And to go back to our earlier point, it doesn't mean that they weren't trying. It just sometimes means that there's not a match before the deadline.
Yeah, I just see like the ancillary moves, right? The moves are kind of on the fringes, around the edges of building out this roster or shoring up whatever weaknesses, or as far as like other teams around the league, like acquiring this player and Miami. It just shows that Miami did not have those players. They've invested those picks in other things, or they've traded them away at other times. And right now, it's a matter of developing players internally. I don't know that LaVine would have been the right fit for Miami. Like we talked about it. I at this point, I know my biggest frustration. It's not necessarily an indictment on the front office or the team or anything like that. It's just some kind of spark offensively, because right now they just don't seem to have the ability to knock down the three-point shot or create easy buckets aside from with their transition defense. Yeah, exactly. It's defense to offense, and that's not necessarily a function. Well, it's not as entertaining, shall we say. We saw some comments about last night's win over the Knicks saying, the mid-range game. I'm sorry, not the Knicks. Last night's win.
Pacers.
The Pacers, that Miami, the mid-range game, that's what you do. You're supposed to win that way. I don't know if I necessarily agree. I'd like to at least pepper in some proficiency from the three-point range, and maybe it happens.
More than 6 in a game would be nice.
Yeah.
Look, they have the 26th ranked offense in the league. They got to fix that somehow, and it doesn't look like they're going to have fixed that at the trade deadline. So they got to figure out some sort of internal ways to fix it, I guess. Or again, we'll talk about some of the buyout options that they're going to have here in a second. Quickly, let's take a look at some of the top trade candidates that we had going into today. Zach LaVine, as we mentioned, from the Chicago Bulls, looks like he's at least staying put. I know that it's 3 o'clock. My clock says 3:03 p.m. Eastern time. You mentioned this earlier, worth repeating. Stuff trickles in the minutes after the deadline, so doesn't mean everything's done. But for now, it looks like Zach LaVine is staying put in Chicago. OG Anunoby, unless I missed it, is staying in Toronto. Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent. It looks like Toronto just said, you know what? We're going to just go out get Jakob Poeltl, and now we're good. So whatever. Good for the Raptors.
For weeks, for weeks after projecting as an obvious seller at the market, they wound up being a buyer.
They kept saying that this 7-game road trip before the deadline was going to determine what they did. They ended up going 4-3 on the trip. I do wonder if they went 3-4, if they would have it would have been a fire sale. John Collins looks like he's staying put in Atlanta.
Yep.
Still nothing on Kelly Olynyk. I know that the Heat have been circling Kelly Olynyk, that they were interested in Kelly Olynyk. It's one of those things where it's hard to see how a deal would get done in terms of the money. Maybe you could send out Victor Oladipo and some sort of draft compensation. We know what Danny Ainge is going to want. He's going to want draft compensation, especially after he didn't get it nearly as much as he probably wanted out of Mike Conley, Jared Vanderbilt, and Malik Beasley. Jordan Clarkson, again, another Utah Jazz guy, possibly on the move. Some rumors about Obi Toppin. Darius Saric ended up getting moved. Mo Bamba got moved. I think Rashawn Holmes, he's here on trade candidates. He could be a buyout candidate potentially out of Sacramento, but I don't know that really moves the needle for Miami, but he could be a good backup center somewhere. So those are the trade candidates. Let's talk about Anunoby, though, because I know that a lot of Heat fans were all in on OG Anunoby. I see it in the comments now. Why not trade for OG Anunoby? Let me just start with my take, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, David, but I like OG Anunoby.
Mm-hmm.
The asking price, it sounded like, that was being reported, and this was before the Raptors went all in with Jakob Poeltl, was 3 first-round picks for OG Anunoby.
Yeah.
That is at the max level of what it is that he can offer. Again, it would require lifting protections on that OKC pick, which would cost something else. I like OG Anunoby as a player. There's sort of a line out there that he's a 3-and-D guy who shoots 40% from 3. He's not a 40% three-point shooter. Check the stats again. Like, maybe you haven't paid attention after 2 weeks of the basketball season, but he's cooled off significantly. And he's shooting 36%. And he shot 36% from 3 last year. That's fine, but it's 36% versus 40% is very different. 40% is elite. 36% is above average. I don't know that OG Anunoby fixes Miami's problems. I don't know that he takes your 26th ranked offense and brings in anything more than 25th. I don't think he's not really a shot creator, shot maker of any kind of sort. Defensively, yeah, he makes a lot of sense, but like he don't have defensive issues. They have offensive issues. And so if you could get OG Anunoby for cheap, yeah, but he's not going to be cheap. And I don't think it's worth treating him like the final piece to the puzzle. I just don't think he is.
Yeah.
Not for Miami, at least.
I agree 100%. I would have wanted to trade for Anunoby mostly for on personal level. Like I just like, OG, and like I like his sense of humor. I like his personality in general. That's what I'm looking for in terms of like covering a locker room that's fun and interesting to be with, and to talk to players that are fun and interesting to talk to. So it's not necessarily that he would have contributed to a high level of winning. He would have fit, in theory, a positional need. But if we're hearing the reporting out of Toronto that he wants a bigger role, that he wants a lot more money, etc., like I don't think Miami is a place for him, and I don't know that any of the contending teams are a place for him.
What would he be? Yeah, where would he be on offense in Miami's pecking order?
Yeah, I mean, if they acquire him in Memphis and he wants a bigger role, it's like, well, guess what, buddy? They got John Morant and Desmond Bane and
Jaren Jackson.
And Jaren Jackson, you're fourth on that list, so you're basically fitting into the same role.
Maybe fifth if Dylan Brooks is still jacking up 14 shots a game.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, look, he seems like it would have been a good fit. I get it, but not for 3 first-round picks, not even for 2 first-round picks of Nikola Jovic. I just don't. I see that it was changed for change's sake. I don't know that he necessarily fixes anything. Can he help slightly on the margins? Yes, maybe. Would he have caused more problems down the road? Potentially. And that's also an issue.
A small issue or a small improvement on the margins isn't worth 3 first-round picks or 2 first-round picks in Jovic. It's just not worth it. So
you criticize Miami for not having assets. You can't want them to throw away assets on a player that isn't going to necessarily, basically the bottom line of a trade machine thing where he says he contributes to X number of wins or losses, etc. Anunoby's not going to contribute to more than 1 win over the course of the season. So is 1 more win really worth sacrificing 3 first-round picks? No, absolutely not. I think it was. This is why you have to have that kind of balanced perspective as far as what the front office is doing. Like, I know I'm getting criticized for it, and that's okay. I think the front office is level-headed enough to say, you know what, we do need changes. We do need to make moves around the edges, but not for whatever our treasure trove of assets in order to just acquire a player of Anunoby's caliber.
Yeah, and I do wonder if the in-between trade, had it been available, would have been something that they would have done. And based on what we're seeing, it doesn't really look like that in-between trade was an option, right? Like they have like the little, the Jay Crowder moves, the Gary Payton II moves, and things like that. Just looking at this Woj tweet, nothing here. There was some in-between trades, right? Even what the Lakers did in acquiring D'Angelo Russell, and I don't think that the Heat were, again, the Heat just didn't have what it took to kind of get involved in that. Those in-between trades for like a John Collins or a PJ Washington or something like that just weren't really there. It felt like, okay, big, huge deals for Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant, and then smaller deals, 5 second-round picks for Jay Crowder. And the 5 second-round picks for Jay Crowder kind of deal never made sense for Miami. Miami never had what it took to get in on the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving type of deals. And so that middle ground, there was no other deals like that. Now, had John Collins got moved for a first-round pick and a salary, which the Heat could have done, right, in a world where Atlanta was listening on John Collins' offers, and John Collins got moved to Utah for that or something, then I would have a lot of questions, because then it's like, okay, you're not doing the smaller stuff, you're not doing the mid-size stuff, and you're not doing the bigger stuff, so you're doing nothing. So look, we are 10 minutes after the trade deadline here. I think we've basically talked about all the trade candidates. It doesn't look like anything is really going to happen here in terms of Miami trading for anybody. So we can go in a few different directions here. I want to start with the buyout market. Okay. So we've got a number of players who are probably going to be involved on the buyout market here. As you can see on this graphic, Russell Westbrook at the top of this list. Other names that could be or are reportedly already about to be bought out: DeAndre Jordan, Goga Bitadze, John Wall, Serge Ibaka, Noel, especially now that the Pistons ended up getting James Wiseman. Noel seems like he's probably going to get bought out there. Mason Plumlee is not going to get bought out this anymore because he's going to the Clippers. And then Will Barton could potentially get bought out of Washington, which is interesting. So of those names, obviously the headliner, the big flashy one, and the guy that's sitting there in the corner there is Russell Westbrook. Your thoughts on maybe Miami adding Russell Westbrook after this buyout market? Because as we've heard, it's the Clippers and it's the Heat, according to some reports, that were tied to Russell Westbrook, and the Clippers may have already addressed their backcourt needs.
Yeah, I'm just not a fan of the Westbrook acquisition, to be honest with you. He's not going to improve Miami's offense. He's not going to be improving Miami's defense. Like, I don't know why. And this goes back to my days of covering him in Oklahoma City Thunder. There's this idea of Westbrook as a good defender. He's a terrible defender. Like, talk about your gambles for steals. Like, he is not going to improve your defense. In fact, he's going to be much, a drain on it, especially in Miami's switch-heavy defense. Excuse me. They're not going to be able to rely on him. So he's not going to be a function of that type of defensive base package whatsoever. Offensively, he's so inefficient. I just can't see any reason why they would bring, for a team that's struggling on offense, acquire a guy who's more likely to go 4 of 15, 4 of 11, 4 of 12. That's not necessarily going to help your offense. He doesn't shoot the three well. He doesn't shoot well, period. He's never had to, mostly because he was relying on his athleticism to dunk over people, which is what made Russell Westbrook such a fun player to watch early in his career. Guess what? He's no longer early in his career. And so we're looking at a player who has refused to change over time. Like, he is, if anything, a worse version of Dwayne Wade, like Dwayne refusing to develop the three-point shot. But at the very least, he always had the mid-range shot. He always had the ability to up-fake somebody into a foul, even late in his career. Westbrook never had those things. It was just, straight line drive, running to the rim, dunking on whoever was on his way. He can't do that now at this point in time. And that's why, they traded him away from the Lakers, and I don't think he's going to help Miami's offense. I tried talking myself into it, one from just a perspective of it's a name, it's somebody to watch, but even in the locker room, he's a surly, sour presence, especially now on his, fifth team in the past 4 years. Like, he's been with the Rockets, the Wizards, like the Thunder, obviously, the Lakers now, and he's potentially going to be bought out. The Utah Jazz, excuse me, I should consider the team he's actually currently on, and then get bought out and join whatever team he does. So I don't see any benefit of even considering him. And I tried thinking about it, and like maybe in terms of like if he's running to the rim at least and creating layup opportunities, kind of like what Victor Oladipo used to do. At the very least, he's attacking the rim, he's putting pressure on the rim, and then maybe Bam or somebody else, Orlando Robinson, maybe any of the bigs can finish up for additional points around the basket. He doesn't even bring that. It's like it's settling for what he calls his cotton shot, the 10 to 15-foot jumper, and not hitting it 70% of the time. That's not offense. That's not anything. That's not a contribution. And so I hope that Miami stays clear of Russell Westbrook.
I think they kicked the tires on Russell Westbrook a couple of years ago. I think it was when he was getting traded by Houston. I can't remember exactly which Russell Westbrook trade it was. Russell Westbrook, if you're an NBA front office and you've watched Russell Westbrook, I don't know why you would sign him at this point, halfway through the year. It's that bad with him. Defensively, he's a negative. He's to your point, he's not doing anything out there. He barely tries. Offensively, he doesn't do anything the Miami Heat want or need. He's not an outside shooter. They need to fix their outside shooting. He doesn't screen. He doesn't set screens. Yeah. The Heat have all of their guards screen. Miami's staple action is the splash action, where they have one guard set that baseline screen for another guard in the corner. Russell Westbrook's not going to set that screen. Russell Westbrook's going to say, no, I'm the guy going to shoot from the corner. That action doesn't work if the defense knows which player is going to shoot it. And every time Russell Westbrook has the ball and he's open from three, he basically shoots it. Or like you said, he tries to conjure whatever limited athleticism he has left and just sort of careens into the paint, falls over, and then turns the ball over. So that's basically what Russell Westbrook does. I would be very surprised if the Heat went down that road. I would have been less surprised if they had managed to trade Kyle Lowry. But now you cannot have Lowry and Russell Westbrook on that team together. That, to me, makes no sense. You're toggling between 2 point guards at that point who have not been positive contributors on offense this year. And that doesn't make any sense. And Gabe Vincent's playing well. So then what do you do with him? To me, the Russell Westbrook thing doesn't... When we're talking about team needs for the Miami Heat, you need depth in the front court and you need shooting. And Russell Westbrook is none of those things. So I think it's safe to say that Russell Westbrook, that's not going to happen. if you're a Heat fan that wants it, sorry, I don't know what to tell you.
Can I suggest a name that wasn't on the list that you prepared there earlier?
Please.
Some news out of Cleveland that there's a possibility that Kevin Love, who was not traded and is an expiring deal, might get bought out as well. He's kind of fallen out of the rotation. He's been more of a bench warmer / pseudo cheerleader, not quite the Udonis level standard, but he's been such a good locker room guy for a team that was rebuilding and a young team and had gone through several transitions in their post-LeBron era. That made a lot of sense. JB Bickerstaff had a personal relationship with Kevin, and that's why he was a big fan of his and had open and frank conversations about Kevin Love and with his role, etc. But there's still the possibility he might get bought out. You're talking about size. You're talking about shooting. Love represents those ostensibly. I think there's a possibility there. I'm not, is that somebody worth monitoring if you're the Heat front office?
Yeah. Spo has long been an admirer of Kevin Love's game and just
Agreed.
The way he approaches his job and his professionalism. And I think Spo would want Kevin Love. I think he would ask for that. Kevin Love's probably more of a 5 these days, but if you play him next to Bam Adebayo, who's to say who's doing what, right?
Yeah.
Bam Adebayo is versatile enough. He could make whatever matchup work. Is he a perfect fit? No, he's not. He's out of the rotation in Cleveland for a reason, but he could stretch the floor. He hasn't lost his shooting stroke. Defensively, there are concerns, but I'll go back to what I said. What do the Heat need? They need 3-point shooting and size in the front court. Kevin Love can shoot the ball, and he is a large human. And so we're talking about buyout candidates here. And if it's for free, you could do worse. And he won't cause any – he'll be welcomed in that locker room. He will be well-liked in that locker room. And that's a big thing too. So if Kevin Love is bought out, and you mentioned the report, do you remember who reported it?
I think it was Matt Moore, who was a recent guest of this show.
He was. So Matt Moore knows what's up. So if that's something that they can agree on between Kevin Love and the Cleveland Cavaliers, that makes a lot of sense. And by the way, Kevin Love's been out of the rotation for a while in Cleveland. So maybe, and he's in the final year of his contract. So it feels like maybe things were going this way anyway, right? And I don't think that there were any viable Kevin Love trades out there to move that $30 million contract. So if he gets bought out, makes $15 million off the buyout or whatever it is at this point, prorated at this point in the season, and the Heat have whatever it is, $4.8 million below the luxury tax line now. They also have their full biannual mid-level exception and what's remaining of their other exception, which is in that $4 to $4.7 million range or whatever it is. That they could offer somebody like Kevin Love if it becomes a bidding war or any other buyout candidate. They have room there to potentially outbid other teams that might only be limited to the mid-level exception. So that's at least worth noting there too.
Question in their comments here: how long is the buyout market? There's no deadline on that. The only thing is you want to be able to add a player before a certain date ahead of the end of the season, because if not, he will not be eligible for your playoff roster. So that's the quote unquote deadline in that. You can add a player at any point until your season ends. You just can't add him as an active player onto the playoff roster if you don't sign him before a certain date. And I don't know what that date is off the top of my head. I think it's a few weeks before the actual end of the regular season. So yeah. I would say you're probably looking to acquire a player. First of all, assuming he gets bought out, he would probably get bought out sooner rather than later if they can negotiate a certain amount. And if then he becomes a free agent. So you could sign anybody, just similarly to some of the names that we talked about recently, Hassan Whiteside, Boogie Cousins et al. You can sign any of those players. They're available. There's just not much of a market for those kind of players. And the buyout market is basically names that are at least active in the NBA, guys that are currently on rosters. They get bought out of their respective deals. They enter into that unrestricted free agency pool, and now any team could add them. So there's still a possibility of adding some players that way. Kelly Olynyk could get bought out. Now, again, some of these names, every year there's always some disgruntled player who's like, I didn't get traded. I want to negotiate a buyout. I'll take less money on the final 3 months of my contract if you just, buy me out of here. Or even a player that gets traded to a situation that they're not interested in. I thought I was getting moved to a contender. Instead, you send me to Charlotte. I don't want to be here. Can you please buy me out of my contract?
Reggie Jackson just moved to Charlotte. I think somebody asked about that in the comments. Reggie Jackson's a fine player. Again, I don't know that he's solving many Miami Heat needs. John Wall was on this graphic. Let's bring this up again. Just copy and paste whatever we said about Russell Westbrook. Yeah. And just apply it to John Wall. And John Wall is even further out of being an NBA player than Russell Westbrook is at this point. Let's talk a little bit more about the Kelly Olynyk thing, because he has friends in the Miami Heat locker room. right? He's not that far removed from that team. That's kind of how things work, right? Kelly Olynyk looking around Utah. Hey, I thought I was going to get traded. You moved Conley, you moved Beasley, you moved Vando, Jared Vanderbilt. What are we really doing here? Give me a break. You know, I know you guys want to play Walker Kessler Walker, 40 minutes a game. Send me somewhere where I can win. I'm at that stage in my career. And if Miami Heat players can get in Kelly's ear and say, hey, man, negotiate that buyout. We'll take care of you. You know, like we've got this biannual mid-level. We take $3 million less of what you would have been owed on your prorated contract. We'll give that. We could back that up here in Miami because of the Dwayne Dedmon salary dump. I don't know. I don't know that that's going to happen. I'm just telling you that's typically how this kind of stuff with the interpersonal dynamics in the NBA works, right? That's not breaking news here. But if he's got fans in that locker room, and he does, then something like that could make sense. So I think Kelly Olynyk is worth exploring. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's explore it. Kelly Olynyk, let's just say hypothetically, he ends up signing with the Miami, gets bought out, signs with the Miami Heat. How big of an impact does Kelly Olynyk make?
Not much. Not much. I know. Look, I again, personal connection. I appreciate Kelly Olynyk in that locker room. Open, honest, fun guy to talk to. Good sense of humor, etc. Again, this is my personal connection as far as those players in the locker room. As far as the on-court fix, he would be more of that kind of Luke Babbitt type player. I could see him starting the first and third quarters, maybe coming in situations, specific situations where you might need a 3-point shot. He's not a great rebounder,
do you say that,
even at 7 feet.
Never been a good rebounder, but do you say that because you feel like, having watched the Jazz this year, he's not as good as he was when he was in Miami? You think he's at like a different stage of his career?
I don't. I think that was his role in Miami too. Like even before he was traded, like
he's a playmaker. He makes passes and stuff. Luke Babbitt doesn't do any of that.
No, you're right. I mean, Kelly's game hasn't changed or aged much because he wasn't exactly relying on a high level of athleticism anyway. So I think he's still a 3-point shooter. He's still a smart player as far as the dribble handoffs and things of that sort. The Kelly keeper, we're not going to see that much. Like, I mean, we didn't see it much to begin with. There was a lot of fun on the occasional play, but you saw it maybe once every 4 or 5 games, and it was fine. Like again, he's not driving to the rim with any kind of power or anything like that, or speed, where he's just going to, the defense is going to be like, well, I didn't even see that coming. So, he's a fine addition. I'd like it in terms of, again, you can move Caleb back down to the role he had last year, where I think
you could start Kelly Olynyk, and then you could play Caleb more on the
third
perimeter.
Quarters.
That's why
possessions here and there.
I like the Kelly Olynyk idea. It's not going to bring the Heat back to the finals if you add Kelly Olynyk. That's not.
Quick question here. Quick question: Kelly or Plumlee? Kelly. I think he fits a better need than Plumlee. First of all, Plumlee's not getting bought out.
Yeah, no, Plumlee's not getting bought out. It very easily could have been missed among the flurry of moves, but Mason Plumlee got traded to the Clippers. Clippers, yes. And that's going to be their backup center.
Backup there, yeah.
Exactly. So Plumlee seems to have found a home there. How about this? Kelly Olynyk or Kevin Love?
Just because it's easier to incorporate somebody who's familiar with the system, you got to go with Olynyk on that. I think I trust Kevin Love's shooting more, and I think he's still a better rebounder. He just has a knack for rebounding that Olynyk never seems to have, even at his size. So I would go with, you could still dump it off. I think he's a better passer too. I think it's pretty even. I think Love is a better option, but
I would go with Kelly Olynyk. He's shooting 39.6% on 3.5 threes this year, 11.6 points per game. He's not a rebounder. 5 rebounds a game. He's not a rebounder. That's why he basically got shoved aside in Utah. But I would go Olynyk. I just think it gives you a little bit more playmaking, a little bit more sort of dynamic looks on offense than Kevin Love does. I think Love at this point in his career is going to
Kelly Olynyk and dynamic in the same sentence. I mean,
more than Kevin Love. I mean, that's what beggars can't be choosers at the buyout market, David. That's what we're this is bargain bin at Walmart is what we're talking about here. So look,
here's another question. Do you think Orlando will buy out Terrence Ross? I don't get that sense. It's a possibility. Like, he'd have to request it, and I don't know that he would. Like, again, if you're a veteran player, you don't necessarily have to commit to winning or being part of a contender. He was part of a bad Raptors team. Now he's been a part of a bad Magic team for the past few seasons. Like, he's happy there. I think he's happy collecting his checks and buying his comic books and living a good life, a better life than most of the people watching this video or even hosting this video right now. So I think, I think there's no incentive for him to say, I really want to leave the Orlando Magic, as long as he can continue collecting his money. Now, assuming the Magic say, look, we'll give you every cent of your contract and you could just buy it out so you can explore other options. If that's the case, then yeah, I'm sure he'd love to join.
And let's be clear. I mean, what if the reason Terrence Ross would seek a buyout would be to join a winning team? And I'm not saying that the Heat aren't, but Terrence Ross is a valued player. He's a respected player across locker rooms across the NBA. I feel like the Lakers or Clippers would be all over it. You know what I mean? And if it's playing for one of those teams who are legit, some people view the Lakers as legit contenders because of LeBron James, but there's that. One other buyout name that I want to I want to bring up here is Nerlens Noel. Okay. The Heat have kicked the tires on Nerlens Noel, according to some reporting throughout the season. And it looks like he's going to probably get bought out by the Detroit Pistons. The Heat need a backup center. Now, one of their options, of course, is to just promote Orlando Robinson from the two-way contract up to the 15-man roster. Orlando Robinson is healthy, coming off the fractured thumb. He has stabilized some of those backup center minutes. Dwayne Dedmon is no longer part of this roster. But I think that Nerlens Noel would at least be an interesting option for a Miami Heat team that could use a little bit more rim protection. Orlando Robinson is big, but he's not really a rim deterrent. He's not that athletic. Nerlens Noel is very athletic. And Nerlens Noel is a solid rebounder, too. So your thoughts on Nerlens Noel?
He's a fine player. I mean, again, kind of fits the same issue that we're talking about. Most of Miami's needs are on the offensive end, and he doesn't address those. But in terms of if you're leaning into the identity, and we've talked about this before, Miami's identity based on we need our transition defense. We need to be able to execute defense into offense because that's how we generate points most easily. In that sense, Noel makes a lot of sense because then he's, blocking shots, forcing turnovers, things of that sort, and that leads to easier offense for a team that struggles to shoot and generate points. So it might make sense. If he's bought out, I certainly have no problem with Miami doing due diligence. There's never been a problem with Noel off the court that I know of, so I think he seems like a pretty good fit. There's concerns there in terms of what he's looking for. Like, he's never been a part of a contending team, really. So is he going to be able to fit in and help Miami in their playoff push? If you don't see Miami as a contender, at the very least, see them as a team that's looking to make a push in the playoffs. And that being said, is Noel on board? Does he want to join a team so that he can have a bigger role and parlay that into a bigger contract next year, et cetera? Yeah, there's
something to be said about getting one of these guys that are hungry for the next contract, right?
Yes.
Something to be said about, hey, three months. Give us all you got, dude. Give us all you got. And look, I like Orlando Robinson a lot. Do I trust him in a playoff setting? No, I've never seen him in a playoff setting. Nerlens Noel has at least he's been around a long time and he's been a journeyman for a reason, but he's at least been around for a long time in a way that Orlando Robinson hasn't. So he might be a better option in the playoffs, and the Heat need backup center minutes in the playoffs. The other thing to consider too is Omer Yurtseven coming back, of course, and how that factors into things. All right. A couple more offseason topics, unless we want to hit any more names on the buyout, which I don't think we want.
Miami, not a playoff team. That's kind of harsh there. There's who knows. There'll be lots of names. That's why everybody needs to subscribe to the show so that we can continue talking about these as they become available. Serge Ibaka, we talked about in a recent episode too. That's not going to make much of a difference. I don't know. I don't see that being a
Goga Batazzi as like a kind of. It never really worked out with the Pacers for some reason, but I don't know. That kind of comes back to
a development project, yeah.
It would be, and it comes back to what the front office thought about Goga in the pre-draft process. If they were fans of him then, maybe you circle the wagon, kick the tires, whatever metaphor you want to use there. Now, but if you weren't really a fan during the pre-draft process, then you just wouldn't go that route. Let's talk about the playoff, them being a playoff team though. I know that a lot of people like the Brooklyn Nets roster because it's just a bunch of wings now, but to me, they have no ball handling and they have nobody to score on offense. I think they drop out. I think they drop out of. They got a nice little cushion here, but they're probably a play-in team at this point, just because of that cushion. I think the top three are pretty set, right? It's Boston, it's Milwaukee, and it's Philadelphia in some order. Beyond that, the 4 seed is wide open, and you get home court advantage with that number 4 seed. That to me is what Miami's goal is now. Is all right internally. What can we do to juice up the offense? What names on the buyout market come available, and who can we go ahead and get? Let's make those additions. Let's make those moves. Let's make those offensive changes if there are any to be made. And then you should start gunning for that number 4 seed. Do we think that that's realistic? Because the other teams obviously in the mix there are the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are very good. The New York Knicks, the Hawks have been playing better as of late. That's pretty much. I'm pulling up the standings right now.
That is the goal, and those are the teams in front there. I think with everything, you always have to consider the possibility of an injury, right? Like what's when the Cavs lost Jared Allen for an amount of time there, they struggled to generate wins too, because he's such a big part of what they do defensively and offensively. He is a contributor on that level. So if any team incurs an injury, it could all derail a lot of their chances. Who knows what the Knicks do? The acquisition of Josh Hart is a fine one. I don't think he necessarily moves the needle for them. He's another bench player. You trade away Kevin. I don't know. He hasn't been on the Knicks for a while, but either way, you trade away Cam Reddish. Excuse me. He wasn't really a contributor there. So you get a player, Josh Hart. My takeaway from all this is Miami can still be good. Can they be a first round exit? Yeah. Guess what? Even the first seed can be a first round exit. It's happened rarely, but Miami isn't the overpowering team that they were during the Big Three era. And I think that's just the reality of what this team is. Can they continue to make a deep push in the playoffs? I personally believe that they can. I know that it's a struggle to watch them offensively. I know they have lapses defensively. I know their roster hasn't been great. And yet there are moments, and there have been moments throughout the season, where we see this team play beautiful, really well executed basketball, regardless of roster construction or sleepy pad or any of the other diatribes that fans want to reserve for this front office. And so given that, I still think that there's a possibility that they can, as you said, make some noise. They can get home court advantage.
Best case scenario for Miami this year.
I think they can go to the finals. I really do.
NBA finals?
Yes. You're telling me you see this Boston Celtics team, the best team in the Eastern Conference of the league, et cetera. You're seeing this Celtics team and you're going, yeah, there's no chance Miami beats them. Yeah, I mean, you didn't think they could beat them last year either, but they did. They almost did. They didn't. They did it, but they almost did. And I still think they're just.
I was surprised I was surprised that went to 7 games and it was as close as it was. I think this Boston Celtics team is much better, and they play much better. And I think they conquered some of their demons by beating the Heat in 7 games. And I do wonder if the Heat almost served as the Detroit Pistons to their Michael Jordan at that point. Not to compare the Celtics to Michael Jordan. I never would do that, but that was the best comp I had at the moment. I think that the best case scenario for this Miami Heat team is the second round of the playoffs. I guess, if Giannis and Jason Tatum suffer season-ending injuries tomorrow, then maybe it's different. But without all that kind of stuff, I think the best case scenario for this team is the second round of the playoffs, and that's all right. That's okay. You went to the conference finals last year. You were a shot away from making the NBA finals. You kind of patched together a playoff team this year, and then you have to recalibrate in the offseason. But I believe this. I don't think that this team is a championship team, and I don't think that the Heat I don't think that the Heat's front office thinks that this is a championship team, and I'll maintain that. That doesn't mean that they can't be competitive. It doesn't mean that you can't build on it. It just means that they got to figure out what direction that they want to build on. And I think this year, to me, where last year was the story of last year was how far can they get, and ultimately what the story was how far they got. Right. The story of this year, to me, is the leap that Bam Adebayo has made, and to a lesser extent, what this season ends up looking like for Tyler Hero when it's all said and done, and what that means for how you build for the future. That, to me, is the story of this Heat season. And I think if you're a Heat fan, that could at least give you something to watch, because Bam just scored 38 points. And David, 2 months ago, you and I would have been doing backflips if Bam Adebayo scored 38 points. And we had fun with that podcast, and we were impressed that Bam scored 38 points, but we were far from doing backflips. And I think that speaks a lot to how much Bam has developed. And I think that there's different goals for every team for every NBA season. And I don't think that a realistic goal this year, I'm not saying that the Heat aren't looking at the championship and saying, hey, we got to go win that. I think Jimmy Butler and the people and the guys in that locker room think that they can, and they should. But for me, I think you have to have realistic goals. And I think a realistic goal this year is just seeing how good Bam can be and then determining what you need to do to build around him.
It's been fun. The whole trade. I personally look. I am. It's been great for our audience. It's been great to be able to continue to talk about all the possibilities. It is to a certain extent fun and interesting, but I'm also glad. And I'll tell you, there's 15 players in that, or 13 players in that locker room, 14 if you count Berea, that are really, really glad this thing is over.
Berea.
What's his name?
Booyah.
I'm sorry, Berea, whatever.
No, not JJ Barea. He's not in that locker room. His ghost might be in that locker room, but that's about it.
No, he's in the Pacers locker room. Yeah, the players are really happy it's over.
One more thing.
We saw this leap from Duncan last year. I'm not putting it out there. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see Max start to shoot much more effectively now with a trade deadline pass.
Well, somebody's got to shoot better at some point. That's all I know. It's just based on averages, it's got to happen. So I'm with you. One last topic before we get out of here. Let's talk a little bit about the offseason. We've gotten a number of comments about some of the offseason players that they could target. LeBron James, if things go south, I guess we can have that conversation. We've already had that conversation. Whatever. I don't know. If LeBron becomes available, I'm sure the Heat would be interested, and so would 28 other NBA teams. Damian Lillard, we talked about a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
He has maintained his loyalty to Portland. Portland has done the same thing to Damian Lillard based on some of their moves, getting Matisse Thybulle. I thought that was actually a really nice kind of quiet move for them. Made a lot of sense for them. So, look, I don't know that that's viable. Can I throw just one name at you? I'm just going to – This is going to be sort of a grenade that I'm going to throw at you, and then I'm just going to let the building blow up, and I'm going to walk away.
Oh, nice.
Trae Young.
Oh, we talked about that. Like, I am not a believer. I'm lower on Young. Like, there's so much there for all of his strengths, as a passer, playmaker, ability to get to the rim, ability to get to the line. Like, I just think Miami's offense is so ingrained on the defensive end, and he's such a problem there. Like, I know that he's improved similarly to what we talk about Tyler Hero. He's made he's gained some ground there, but it's always going to be a problem considering his slight size. I don't know. I don't even know
that he's on. I think you're being nice to him. I don't even know that he's improved defensively. He's awful. He's the worst defender in the NBA. He is, flatly. I'm no. Trae Young was not the answer. I don't and
not to me, not for me.
To Mark Smith here, who I won't put the thing up because I want to get to this one from Kyle, but he says Young isn't a Heat guy, and he's right. So moving on from that, Kyle asks or says that the Heat need Bradley Beal. That's one other one. Number one, we have no intent. We have no signs from the Wizards that they're going to trade Bradley Beal. They're in love with just going 38 and 44 every single year. That's sort of their deal. They're happy with Dolphins. It. That was a low blow. I know you're upset about no
7 and 9. 7 and 9. Sorry, Carl.
Wow, sideswiped.
Threw you off there completely.
Bradley Beal to me is a good basketball player. He's not a winning basketball player, and I don't even mean that as a personal attack. I just think he scores points and that's it. And I don't know that he does much else for you. And he's better than Tyler Hero, but you would have to give up Tyler Hero to get him, and you'd have to give up all your draft picks, and you'd have to pay Bradley Beal $50 million a year. Right. And so if you're and Jimmy Butler's extension is kicking in. So if your idea of building a championship team is paying Jimmy Butler and Bradley Beal $100 million between the two of them and trying to build a roster around that, it's going to be really hard to build a competitive roster around that. So I just think for the costs of what it would take to get him, and ultimately the cost to pay him and build a roster around him, Bradley Beal doesn't make any sense to me.
Pascal Siakam. What is if we're talking stargazing here, right? And you're looking for a star to shake free in the offseason. Who is the best fit for like what Miami?
Lillard. It's Damian Lillard. And honestly, if you want he's a perfect fit. He's a perfect fit next to Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. There's not a better fit in the NBA. First of all, he's a killer. He's an absolute killer. The Heat need that. He could shoot from 30 feet out. He's awesome. He's perfect. And by the way, Damian Lillard has been begging for a center for Bam Adebayo his entire career. A player like that, or a wing who
talked him up during the playoffs. During the Olympics.
Those three were made in a lab to play with each other. I just hope it happens in Miami, and not in Portland, is all I'm saying.
Wow. Are you putting that out there?
Wanted to throw that out there. But look, we're at the point now where there obviously no trade has been done. It's official now, by the way. I'm not sure if we said that, but the Heat have not traded anybody. You wait till the offseason. You maintain your draft picks because you have to. You try. There were reports that teams were calling about Damian Lillard and were rebuffed. You go back. Damian Lillard now is looking at the Western Conference that's got Kevin Durant at the top of it, Nikola Jokic at the top of it. We'll see what goes on with the Warriors. Whatever. Like the West is loaded right now. What happens with the Lakers and the Clippers? Damian Lillard might decide, you know what? Let me go east. You know what? I did all my time in Portland. Maybe eventually he makes that decision. And if it does happen, then Miami makes a lot of sense as a landing spot. Do they have what it takes to get Damian Lillard? That's that conversation we had earlier. Who knows? But it's at least at this point, because you have no other options, worth going into the offseason, trying to figure that out. And then if that's not an option, then you have to make some sort of crossroads kind of decision. I truly do believe that, because this is a team that's getting older and they're going to be paying a ton of money in the luxury tax next year that they don't want to pay for a team that's basically been 500 all year long. It's
just interesting how, like, this conversation with fans and even on our show, like, the weird desperation or interest in acquiring said superstar when you look at Miami. And again, there's 2 top 20 players on this roster. I mean, maybe it doesn't reflect that record wise, but in terms of their postseason over the last 3 seasons since you acquired Jimmy Butler, I don't know that any team has been as successful as Miami. Like, you could say the Milwaukee Bucks, right? They won a championship during that span, et cetera. But, Miami went to the finals in 2021 or 2020. They were swept out in 2021, and they did a pretty good job in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Boston Celtics in 2022. Like, that's a proven team over the past 3 years. And look, NBA history is littered with almost rans, teams that were just this good. Like the New York Knicks of the 90s, were really, really good teams and had Hall of Famers and great drama with the Chicago Bulls and everything else like that. And with Jordan in the league, without Jordan in the league, they just never got it done. And this might be Miami during this particular era. Is that this is their identity too? Oddly enough, with Pat Riley at the helm of those Knicks, and now at the helm of this front office, he's built that same kind of team, just slow, great defensive teams, etc.
Really selling everybody for the second half of the year, David. I'm glad you said it, because I've long had that thought, and I might have said it on the show too. This team's ultimate destiny might be exactly what you just said. A couple of good runs at the finals.
I'm not getting paid by the Heat team. I don't know why the people keep saying that the money they saved by trading Dwayne Dedman is going in my bank account. I'd love for that to be the case. I'd take it if they're offering it, but unfortunately they're not.
Yeah, we don't get paid by the Miami Heat.
Not yet.
We keep it real around here, folks. Look, trade deadline came and went. The Heat ultimately made no moves, but that does not mean that they are not done. In fact, we know that they're not done because they don't have enough players on the roster. As soon as Jamari Bouyer's 10-day contract expires. So we'll see what happens. There will be names on the buyout market, names that we haven't even talked about yet because we haven't had that much time to do so. So stay locked in here to Locked On Heat. Thanks again for tuning in to the Locked On Heat NBA trade deadline special. If you missed any of it, this whole show will remain up on our YouTube channel. And it's also going to be uploaded to our podcast feed, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Odyssey, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Remember to stick with us for the rest of the season by subscribing to Locked On Heat on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. That's it.